I have 6 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. Call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Alice had a family medical emergency, so she is not gonna be here this evening, so I'm gonna chair our meeting tonight. And going through our agenda as normal. Essentially, we're later on when we start our work session piece, we're going to be hearing from the group who went up to hear from the Department of Education and what the next steps are based on, we haven't been together as a committee in a while, and we had asked them to do some recommendations for us as to what to do, because we were sort of at an impasse. Then Montpelier, some things happened, so we're going to get up to date on all of those kinds of things so that we can then hopefully begin to start planning next steps and what those are once we all get on board with what decisions and what recommendations were made for us. And as we've usually done, Amy, there's a sheet going around for people to sign in, so please, folks that are visiting, make sure you sign in so that we can mark you as being here. And is there anybody that has anything that they want to, comments, questions ahead of time before we get started?
Is this the open session?
Yeah. Okay. And I'm just going to remind everybody, since it's been a while since we've been together, to please go ahead and identify yourself and what town you're from.
Okay. 3 weeks ago, there was a forum in Westminster for the whole state of Vermont, and it was very well attended. We had people from the Northeast Kingdom, from the islands up there, all the way down through the state. Everybody here was invited. Nobody came from here, which was very unfortunate, and I'm very sad about that they didn't. The Thrucks, we had superintendents, principals, we had somebody who used to be on the state board fairly recently, as well as school board members and other study committee members throughout the state. The focus of the meeting was alternatives to merger. One of the things that is happening throughout the state is that several supervisory unions are looking at working as a supervisory union as an alternative structure. Act 46 actually defines an alternate structure as a supervisory union with multiple boards. And with the new legislation and whatever everybody's thinking, that we can work as a supervisory union to better the supervisory union, still keep our boards, still keep what we want. And particularly, in my mind, we've had such a good working supervisory union all of these years. I feel personally that this would be a wonderful opportunity to get together and to work on perhaps what we can do. Some of the things that we've been told that we can't do are not true. There are all kinds of things that we can do. We can contract for services. You know, we can do the thing that Frank developed up in Leland and Gray. Now, Dummerston Board is working on alternative structures, and we would really appreciate it if somebody else from other districts would show a little bit of interest in perhaps pursuing that down the road, because I feel that's the best all the way around for all of us. And as I said before, I'm very disappointed that absolutely nobody from this study committee came to the meeting, and they had at least one, if not two, invitations. It would have been, I guess, it just shows me that you weren't open-minded enough to look at something else, and I was very disappointed in that.
Thank you, Debbie. All right, so why don't we move on to approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was March 23rd. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any additions, deletions, corrections to those minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes from March 23rd, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? And Ian are abstaining for attendance, I'm assuming. Okay, great. And we are moving on. Process from the chairperson. So, as I said earlier, we're gonna in a few minutes hear from the folks that did meet with the state and hear about the legislation and the changes so that we can see what our options are, because that's what we asked for. We have a lot of individuals here, and I'm going to say again, please, there's a sheet going around. Please make sure you sign in. We'll have some time in the end. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Ron to start the process of filling us in on what we learned first at the meeting with the Department of Education.
Okay. I'm going to pass around the letter that was sent to the State Board of Education and Secretary Holcomb, just to use that as the basis for our review, to start the review. I think there's enough copies. Might be able to share. So from our, I'll wait till they get this. So from our March 2nd study committee meeting, I'm reading the minutes. The study committee voted unanimously to send the report with the Articles of Agreement to the State Board of Education for advice and guidance with respect to its impasse and how our communities can meet Act 46 requirements. So this letter is essentially going to the State Board and Rebecca Holcomb, the Secretary of Education. Has a little history to that, and so we actually didn't hear back from, I guess we heard back from Donna Russo Savage, and it indicated that they had received our request, that it probably was not appropriate to meet with the state board, but they offered a meeting with the Secretary of Education, Donna Russo Savage, and Chris Leopold. And so we did respond to that. That was for a meeting in May 8th. Alice had sent around an email to all the study committee reps. We wanted to see if we could get representatives from all of the towns, Brattleboro, Putney, Dummerston, Guilford. As it turns out, some people were unavailable, and so as it turns out, it was Alice, Amy, Frank, and myself that went up to that meeting. I don't know, Ricky, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, just, I mean, that was, with any of these meetings that have ever been happening, my understanding has always been whatever study committee members could go, should go. Even if we had had a complete Articles of Agreement to send up, it would be, not all of us would necessarily have to be there, but as many of us that could be there, could be there. And it was unfortunate that many of us, because of other commitments, couldn't be there, but.
Yeah. One of the things that they first talked to us about is that if in a future meeting, it would be helpful to have Donna Russo Savage and Brad James, the finance director for the state of the Agency of Education, and Chris Leopold to come down. They would offer that, and so I think they are actually scheduled to come down for our next study committee meeting on June 21st. But if I could just highlight kind of the main points from that meeting. They talked a lot about, at that time it was House Bill 513 that turned into Act 49 and the Vernon exemption. And so they talked about the fact that it hadn't been signed by the governor, but they felt like it was pretty certain too, and it has since been, that Vernon would be allowed to have a revote to withdraw from the district without having to depend on other districts. So that was something that they talked about in terms of supporting Vernon. And Mike, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, the concept of that.
Well, I think we've discussed it at length in the past. Vernon had a unique situation. I proposed a bill. It was 513. I also had a bill proposed in the Senate, sister bill, and it was incorporated, 513 was incorporated into the Senate bill, and that became Act 49. Along with the provision for Vernon. We also were able to get some changes to the side-by-side language to offer more flexibility to other places throughout the state. The Vernon language was very narrowly crafted to allow only Vernon to use that exemption because of the unique situation. The way it was originally written, people could have argued that they were exempt because at one time they also had school choice. But the deciding factor was that we were the only community in the state that actually was a member of a union high school district. And both the House and Senate Ed committees recognized that as being problematic and felt that we should have the freedom to extricate ourselves from that and then proceed. Also, in testimony before the House and Senate, stated Vernon's position that it was our desire to not hold up the other group from moving forward because whatever entity comes out of that, Vernon's looking to somehow either under a supervisory union umbrella, whatever the situation would be through contracted services or whatever, to remain with the group. Initially, they thought that it was Vernon trying to just remain an independent district, totally separate from everyone. And there were a lot of pointed questions to that. And they said, no, it's not our intention to be a freestanding entity. We want to belong to another group or be associated with another group. So they were also very receptive to that. The only other comment, I think, in the letter that you wrote, where you said Vernon School Board thought that the idea of the 6-year grandfathering wasn't worthy of consideration. I don't want people to think that we didn't appreciate that. We did very much, but it was our opinion that if, in fact, belonging to a district and having school choice was unconstitutional, we could not enter into an agreement that in and of itself would have been unconstitutional because we had no authority to do that. But we did appreciate the other groups working so hard with us to allow us to find a situation suitable for Vernon, and thus hopefully we can move forward. Vernon will be voting in July once again, and hopefully when that's done, you folks will be able to move forward knowing where you are, and then you'll have a vote that'll inform us as to where we are, and we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think Rebecca Holton was happy, as well as the other representatives up there, that it made sense for Vernon to be able to do that, and so they were pleased and with us to make sure we did that.
Mike, I don't understand in the law why Vernon, you guys already voted to leave. So why do you have to vote again?
Actually, that was a question that came up, and it was my preference to do that for a couple of reasons. One, I had told our staff we would, and I think it's only fair. That law changes the playing field dramatically. We don't need the other folks' involvement, so I think it's only fair to bring it back to the community because it is something new. We could have easily said the vote stands, but having changed the law, I think it's kind of like belts and suspenders sort of thing.
So what happens if the town votes no?
Then we'll proceed from there. We're not sure what's going to happen. We would certainly have rapid meetings with our attorneys.
I mean, it was a pretty overwhelming support, the initial vote in August.
And we had a staff meeting today, and I explained the situation to them. I think people understand our motivation and what it is we want to do. And I think there's a degree of comfort that we don't want to flip the apple cart over. We just want to maintain school choice. So I think we'll be successful again. If not, I think it would be unfortunate because I wouldn't, or our town wouldn't want to be the one responsible. If the other 4 towns want to move forward, we wouldn't want to be the one responsible holding them back. So we have not wanted to interfere with the other 4 towns any more than we wanted them interfering with us. So we'll see where it goes.
So one more question. Is it in the intent then, before your vote in July, that Vernon voters would know what the cost is to stay a part of the supervisor? How does the Vernon voter know, or what do you know at that point? for a cost. And you guys had 3 votes to get a budget this year, right?
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if I'm a Vernon voter, I guess I'm not, so maybe I shouldn't even wonder that. How do you go to the polls and understand what that means for you financially to say, I wanna stay? What is the wording even?
Exit the
Well-
supervisor union.
Just to exit the supervisory union, that's the vote?
Yes, not supervise the high school union board, but the high school union district. We would no longer be a member of the high school union district. And that's where we have to know what goes on with the other vote, because we will not have any idea of what it will cost until we know what the new entity is and what we can contract for services and what those services would cost. But in general conversation with Frank, at this point in time, it doesn't appear to be a dramatic change, but that doesn't mean 3 years down the road it couldn't be a dramatic change. So we'll let the voters know that also.
And does that need any voting by any of the rest of us as to what it would cost, or the supervisor, your board, Ricky, have you
No.
looked at that? Or-
Yeah, no, because it's, basically what we're talking about is what we've already kind of figured that out when we voted to let them go ahead, to let Vernon leave. But then also, as far as contracted services and stuff go, that would be something that they would work out with the, whatever the central office entity is at that point to provide those services, and they would, whatever that market rate would be, I would assume.
So, just to,
Is there a market rate though to judge it by?
Yeah, I don't know,
yeah,
yeah.
so to summarize what I'm hearing, and again, I'm not a Vernon voter, so I guess I'm just curious more than anything else. But you would be asking a Vernon voter in that situation to say, yes, we wanna maintain school choice. We think that the central office supervisory union agreement will maintain a roughly equivalent cost as what we have now, but we have no way of saying that for sure because that entity doesn't really exist.
And
Okay.
this is all based on the historical enrollment patterns that have been in existence with Vernon having choice. So from a parent's point of view, there's really not gonna be much of a difference in an enrollment pattern over the last 50 years, because, you know, Vernon kids could go over the last 50, 60 years to any approved educational institution by the AOE. So as long as the enrollment patterns don't change dramatically, we see the cost of a merged system being lower, as you know, from the study committee's work. So the merged system is expected to be more efficient, and therefore the Vernon experience would be translated from the member district to the tuition district. They would pay a tuition rate, and if the assumption is we're either stable or a lower cost, that's where we're coming up with not a dramatic change in the Vernon or in the unified system.
But the tuition rate doesn't include all the central office staffing and,
It does.
well, I'm sorry, the other stuff that comes in through. In the tuition rate, they wouldn't get the professional development, the school bus contracts, the other things that we're now doing because they're leaving.
There's specialization, and that question does raise a number of questions about costs, but the core educational programs, the 90%, 95% of costs are your operating costs at the Union High School. From the question around, Vernon's unknown, they're gonna manage, if this is approved, they'll manage their own operating costs. They control that in the K-6 building. And I think your question gets at, then they don't get to control the secondary costs as they do now. They have a representative on the VHS board and they have a voice there. So they lose that, but the projection is, as they say, similar enrollment patterns, generally a stable or a lower cost at the secondary level, so we don't see a substantial change.
But going back to if I were a Vernon voter, is there any condition under which the supervisory union could change the terms of what the charge would be for tuition? In other words, is there a formula for that, or is that really up to the discretion of the supervisory union?
Well, so that's the big unknown, is that if we merge, then there is no supervisory
Right.
union.
Right.
And so, then it is a matter of, okay, who are you dealing with? So probably nothing dramatically different there in that, well, public schools in Vermont provide a certain array of services from an administrative group, of certain coordination. So whether they procure that from a new entity right here in Brattleboro, or that's, as the AOE has indicated, potentially shared with a similarly organized organization like Vernon, meaning K-6 operating school with 7-12 choice, that's another scenario. And then again, that's to some extent undefined at this point, but it's unlikely it's going to be dramatically different than what's in place today.
Right, and what Frank just spoke of, we've been approached by 4 different districts to meet with them, to join with other districts. And at this point, the Vernon board feels that the district we desire to be with, or the group of towns we desire to be with, are those we're presently with. So that's why we've worked very hard to make arrangements that don't make a lot of changes for the tax base. But the bottom line is, in a couple of years, the State Board of Ed is going to be assigning people somewhere. So, we're not going to be a freestanding district no matter where we are. And could very well, if we're unaffordable and our taxpayers say we can't do this any longer, the board then assigns us to the new entity and says, okay, you're part of that group now. So there is so much that is unknown, it's almost impossible to answer your questions any more than if your voters asked you, can you give us all of what's going to happen if we merge financially? We don't know. I mean, there are a lot of unknowns with this whole process for everyone involved. What we were trying to do is make sure that Vernon being removed from BOHS number 6 did not cause undue financial harm to the other towns. And Frank did the modeling, and we find that there's no real impact there. And he also did the modeling that shows there's no real impact to the taxpayers of Vernon at this point, given the facts that we know.
So but the trade-off, as everyone knows in the study committee's work, is the vulnerability of a separate grand list and a separate impact of a change in cost per student, where now Vernon has been somewhat of an exception again, where most of our enrollment has dropped dramatically, our cost per students have gone up. That means a very different impact to the Guilford taxpayer than it does, let's say, to the Brattleboro taxpayer, because of the grand list and the direction of the grand list. So there's the trade-off, is that the independent small system of 160 kids in an elementary school are much more vulnerable to a tax rate spiking 10 or 15% in 1 or 2 years than a larger entity, and that's there's the trade-off.
And our biggest spike, we're most concerned about, the closure of Yankee is our biggest spike, and there's nothing we can do about that. And fortunately, Vernon has, its population in the last several years has stayed the same or is ticking up slightly. So we're seeing, unlike most towns, we're seeing an increase in student population, which would work to our benefit.
So I'm gonna continue, because that was just one portion of our 45-minute allotted time at that meeting. So next we reviewed our articles with the agency staff. And it was a lot of discussion about the consideration of this as the best way to serve our students. So we went through each section of the Act 46 articles and talked about those. Frank has some notes referring to that.
Yeah, so just a kind of a 4-point bulleted list that if you get Act 49 off the web, you'll see it right on the second page of the new act. It's what they had shared with us, what Rebecca Holcomb and Donna Russo-Savage had shared is what our study committee findings have determined are consistent with what they are seeing at the state level on the benefits of merged systems. So the Act refers to 113 districts that have merged into 23 unified systems. For benefits of the merged systems that are consistent with, again, the articles that this study committee has developed and is ready to present or has shared with the AOE. K-8 choice among elementary schools in the merged system. So, that question's been asked a number of times in our region. They're seeing that as a significant benefit that has been realized with these.
So we're talking about K through 8th grade students being able to transfer to other schools within our supervisory district without worrying about tuition payments and things like that.
Or impact on costs per student,
Yeah.
or program. Greater flexibility in sharing staff and resources among individual schools, and of course that's central to our budgets, of course, the vast majority. Eliminate bureaucratic redundancy, so we've talked about that as well, like 7 audits versus 1 audit. And then another one I hadn't heard so much of, but flexibility to create academies within the region. So if a school wants to focus on a particular area of academic or school activities, they're seeing that is happening as a result of these mergers. So we talked about how that would relate to our own supervisory district proposal.
So we talked then about kind of going forward in the time frame, and thinking about Vernon, July, August, not knowing exactly when they would vote, and thinking about some sort of merger vote in the fall. They talked about the fact that this would still maintain our grant and tax incentives, that we haven't missed that, which I think we thought we did. And I think it was well, no, the small school grants are all part of that as well. So yeah, if we don't merge, we'll come up with some appropriate system. The small schools would lose the small school grant, but the $150,000 AOE grant, transition grant, and then the tax incentive starting with 8 cents, 6 cents, 4 cents, 2
So
cents.
what is the deadline for that? If we thought we missed-
That was extended as part of this.
November
Yeah,
30th.
November.
Yeah.
yeah. Because it had been earlier.
July.
Yeah.
So that was good news.
We have to have a vote,
Before then.
an affirmative vote?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so then we said, well, would you come down and talk with us? And so they said they would. We had set the date, June 21st.
June 20th, I thought you said. I thought we just said our Brattleboro board for the 21st to.
You said the 21st a minute ago.
Yeah, I might have misspoken, so let me just check. I have Brattleboro Town on the 20th,
Yeah,
and the study committee on the 21st.
So we swapped because, and went back to the 21st because you said that there was one set up for the 20th and you were concerned about how we were bumping into it. So at our last meeting, when you guys were doing training.
Yeah, I do have the 20th for Act 46 on my phone.
Yeah, I'll confirm, but I think Donna Russo-Savage was available on the 21st.
So right now, the three of us have that day either way, but I guess we probably need to let the rest of Brattleboro folks know.
So the idea was, if in fact it is the 21st at 6 o'clock, they would come down and actually go through the articles that we have and some of the alternatives that they're aware of, with keeping in mind what's best for our students in terms of the opportunities and programming.
And so who all would come down?
Donna Russo-Savage, Brad James, he's the finance director at the state, and Chris Leopold.
And Brad James is the one who comes up with the equalized student magic.
Yeah, you can ask him.
You can draw back the curtain and show
Yeah.
how it's done. Is there anything else from that meeting that you wanted to share?
No, just that I'm confirming in the email it was June 21st.
Did they give any indication that articles, that their opinion of our articles was that that perhaps was not the best way to serve our students?
No.
So they seem to agree with what we had proposed.
Yeah. And, you know, Rebecca Holcomb, you may remember when she came down
Mhm.
to Putney, she was pretty impressed with the research that we had done. And I think since then, how other districts have merged as supervisory district just kind of confirms that they see the benefits of that. You know, we didn't get into too much, but, you know, the whole concept of modified union districts, some districts in, some out, you know, I think they'll comment on that.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Excellent. So I think one of the things is, you know, for us to be thinking about or talking about what specific questions do we want to ask when they come down in a couple of weeks? Do, you know, specific things that we need to know from them? I'm sure people have ideas about what some of those questions would be.
Yeah, and that is my question is, you know, we have kind of a conventional type merger being proposed, and would they think that we would be best served in any other structure than that? Because I'm envisioning if we were to propose something other than that and they didn't agree with it, then they're gonna come down and say, no, you're gonna do this instead. So it'd be good to get an idea of.
So they're not gonna come down and say, no, you should do this instead. They won't do that.
But they have to approve it, right? So they have
Yeah.
to agree that that's the best option.
And they still haven't even looked at it yet, right?
No, they've had our articles for months. Yeah, and they haven't changed that much over the, I mean, I don't have
Right.
all the versions here, but over the last 6 months, they haven't changed much. Some of the big changes for us were the voting and the board representation, which was a really positive thing as it turned out. But, you know, the four-town merger is the same thing they've seen for probably over a year.
But they could do that, right? So I wanna make sure I understand. So if we were to present something other than a four-town merger,
Yeah.
they could get that and say, you know, we don't think this is the best. We think it should be a four-town merger, or
They would give us advice.
they would give
Yeah,
feedback.
yeah, they would give feedback.
Okay.
So in the current format, did they express no concerns about our current articles of agreement? There was nothing of remarkable.
Rebecca and John, in
So
this
who-
brief meeting.
So if that's the they, who are the final theys that give the sanctification blessing?
So it's Rebecca Holcomb, from the Agency of Ed, with input from Donna Russo Savage, Brad James, and then it goes to the state board. And the state board is relatively new in terms of new members.
That's what I meant when I
Yeah.
said they haven't seen it yet. So that state board that gives the final approval has still not actually
Well,
seen it.
members of the state board have seen the earlier versions, but not to act on, and not to, you know, their point to us is it's not appropriate for them to comment to us on those articles at this point. Yeah, so informally, I mean, Stephen Morse, when he came down to Dummerston, whenever that was.
But they still have to have an official meeting
Yeah,
to look at our stuff.
definitely.
And that takes how much time to back up?
I think that's a good question for the 21st, to,
Yeah.
you know, map out a timeline, make sure that we do submit to the new state board calendar and allow for the warnings and.
Well, if we're talking about a vote that has to be done by November 30th, I'm just thinking we don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
Mhm.
If
And we
they,
have-
I'm assuming they don't meet every month in the summer, maybe.
Well, they do.
They do? Well, that's good.
And we have to wait until Vernon's vote is complete
Yes.
before we would have to.
We
We
do?
can't start until August,
Yeah.
really, right?
Well, maybe July.
When are you voting?
The 11th.
Of July?
It may have changed to the
Yeah.
23rd. We are voting in July.
Why was it pushed?
Actually, I don't know, I received an email today from Barb Nowakowski with the timeline. It said the 20th. Our plan was to have a informational session on the 10th. The second informational session would have been on the 10th, and the vote on the 11th. And that changed
I think the 30, 40-day window.
something, yeah.
Wasn't covered.
Can't be the 23rd of July, you said? It's a
I-
Sunday.
No, obviously not. Maybe the 25th. I don't have the email right now. I received that this morning. But we will be voting in July. Initially, we were thinking late August, but then Ron raised the question, how does that impact your timeline for your vote? We said, well, we'll move it closer, as close as we can.
So I'd say based on the calendar, it's either gonna be July 24th, on Monday, or Tuesday the 25th.
Yes, I know it's July 20-something. And the town clerk commented on it. I think it may be the Tuesday. I think that was a better day for him, for the town to have a town vote. So,
Are there other, from the study committee, are there other questions that we want to make sure that we have down somewhere to bring to that meeting on the 21st?
My one question, one of my questions, I'm trying to think of one, would be if they could advise any way to further strengthen our school leadership councils so that those have genuine power and authority.
Definitely worth asking. All right. Anything? Yeah.
I think there's been some confusion along the way about what can be changed and what can't be changed in the articles and about warning, and I think a real clarification from Donna Lisa Savage about what articles can be changed, because I think sometimes it's been misspeaking or whatever, but to have the AOE on the record is saying, you know, can leadership councils be done away with from a higher authority?
You're talking about which articles, like when we went through a list at one point of the new, whatever the new entity's board is, could decide to get away with. Away with
What
certain
can just
articles,
be
but not
changed
others.
without going to a vote of the public,
Yeah.
and what we can do to affect which articles can be changed without going to a vote of the public.
And I had contrary advice from the Dummerston attorney about if it's not in the warning, can it be changed, so,
Spoon?
I haven't heard, but maybe I missed it, I just haven't read it someplace. Has the state developed any standards or measurements or something, criteria by which they will determine at some point whether Act 46 has changed anything in the state? And in terms of what outcomes they're seeking, I guess that's the first thing, is there any list of what outcomes from all of this the state is hoping for? And two, have they developed any measurements about whether they have achieved them or working towards them, making progress?
Those are good questions too, I'm not sure. Yeah, Joe.
So I guess I'd like to see, based on the new law that was passed, and there's different alternatives, that somebody walk us through very clearly, this is an alternative that applies to you, and if you did it, this is how it would fall through. So, way to say it,
Yeah, no, I agree.
how it would shake out
Right.
in each example, just to make sure we haven't missed anything that's out there that somehow suddenly makes sense with some change. And at the same time, then I guess maybe they present it and we decide at that same time, does it make any sense to look at that, or have we already sufficiently looked at that? But I just wanna see them verbalized, and sheesh, I'd like them drawn out with charts and colors, but whatever they can do.
Asking to bring their crayons or something.
Yeah, I just need a little visuals.
All right. So we have a lot of questions for,
We have 6 so far.
okay, when they come down. Anything else from the study committee?
Are those questions something that we can submit to them ahead of time?
Oh,
They
yeah.
have a presentation
Yeah,
or
definitely.
something?
That would be important.
But Jill's requesting for colors and charts.
Yeah, put that color and chart in there.
They're not gonna do that. The colors and charts.
Oh, no, no.
Ian has some paper for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all white though.
Alright. Alright, So I'm gonna open it up to the public for questions or comments, things like that. So who would like to speak, and we can kind of go through. Why don't we start on this side and head that way? So go ahead. Make sure you identify yourself and what town you're from, please.
Excuse me, I'm Andy Davis from Brattleboro. So, just two things. Have you all as a study group talked at all about where you would go if there was a town, a multi-town vote on the merger and one of the towns did not pass it, one or more of the towns did not pass it? Have you, like you were asking about that contingency with Vernon's vote in July, have you had a conversation about where you would, the next step would be if one of the proposed merger towns did not approve the merger? And the other one, and then I'll sit down and just listen, sort of to amplify what Jill was just saying, I would love to see, and I think there are many other members of the public would like to really see, since the alternative, some of the changes happened at the legislature, exactly how there's all these things in the law about side-by-sides and 3+1s and 2+2+1s, and some of those seem like they were designed to keep Vernon in a supervisory union with us without endangering their choice, but being part of an alternative governance structure. And I too would really love to see those spelled out, and I think many other members of the public would like to see those, so that we're not just moving forward with the preferred merger without going, is this the best one? Because I haven't really heard an explanation of these 2 or 3 other options. And I just, any feedback on those 2 questions would be helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ines McGillian from Dummerston. One thing popped out at me when I read Act 49, and that was that the legislature believes that it has, and it may have, the power to actually amend articles of agreement after they've been written. And so that's sort of a third amendment problem that I'm seeing. And I would love if that could be a specific question posed to Donors of Savage and Rebecca Holcomb. Because my concern then would be that the articles aren't even really worth the paper they're written on. If despite what we put in them about how they can or should be amended, if the legislature has the power to amend them or declare items within them as being void, where does that leave us, and how do you plan, given that possibility?
Moving over.
I'm Akara Draper from Dummerston. I really want to just express a concern that I want to encourage you. First, I want to thank you for all your hard work, because I know that this has been a grueling process. And I really want to encourage you to take the time to look at some of the alternative structures. We have a new law that has opened up the possibilities here. And while I haven't gone through each one of the articles, what I hear in my community is an incredible need to be heard for those that disagree with this preferred structure. And I just want to know that you all and all of us can work together to work this out, rather than to just march forward with our ears closed. No, stop, don't tell me again that you don't want this. You have some really concerned community members here, and it's really important to listen to them, and I want to encourage you to do that.
Jody Romano, Dummerston. I didn't get my name the very first time. A couple of things. One of the things about your meeting with Donna Russo Savage and Rebecca Holcomb and Chris Leopold is that you are all of one mind talking to them. There was no opposition talking to them. So they aren't hearing what we're saying here. So I think that's very important. The other thing that I'm concerned about, and maybe someone can fill me in, is the relationship between Chris Leopold. He has been our lawyer, and he is the State Board of Education's lawyer. That seems like a real conflict to me. I mean, he's been guiding us through this and giving us answers, and now he's giving answers to the State Board. It just does not seem right. So when he comes down here, I think that's a question that he needs to be asked.
Anybody else from the public? Any questions? Yeah?
So, Jody, to your comment about the opposition not being represented at the meeting with Rebecca Holcomb and Donna, we actually did talk about Dummerston in particular and their opposition to the Articles of Agreement as written. So that was raised.
But
Probably not.
You were presenting it, I wasn't presenting it, and I think there's a big difference, Amy.
What was their response?
We didn't go into much detail. We were there to talk specifically about the changes in the law and how that would affect the study committee and its current Articles of Agreement, and that's what we focused on. There was acknowledgement during our conversations that Dummerston, Dummerston and Vernon both, were not particularly in favor.
Okay. Sure, yeah, over here.
Thanks. Ricky, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm Dick Berkstis from Dummerston, and I really applaud your work and your staying together in this effort. I've come to a lot of these meetings, and I've seen a lot of these meetings over the years and over the past 2 years. And I remember coming to a meeting early on and with the urging that this committee look to somehow exploring alternatives. I didn't understand at the time that really is a function of the school board and boards getting together to look at Section 9 in the law, and that alternative governance structures, which is the governance structure we now have, which has now become an alternative under the law, is an opportunity to go forward. In fact, John Castle in the North Country, who has 13 school districts, may have 12, one may consolidate, is hoping to keep his school district together intact as it is. And I know that the law on the one hand says, the goals are creating more opportunities for kids and saving money, and those are given. But the real focus seems to have been on governance, reducing the number of school districts around the state to, quote, save money. And we know from discussions over the last 2 years that people understand, and I think the legislature misses the point, that large school districts, because they seem so efficient in spreading costs, end up really with continued increased budgets every year, perhaps more opportunities, but it doesn't save money. And so I've been an advocate to look at another way to do things. We know that the superintendent has the opportunity to enter into contracts, and some of what I think you're hanging your hat on is the ability to spread costs over a wider number of students. The examples that you've used make sense to a lot of people. The incentives make sense to a lot of people. But what you're already doing is you're saving money by consolidating purchasing. You've got in the plan to not replace teachers going forward, changing the class size. These are all money savers, but it doesn't require merging. But you haven't stopped to look at that. You didn't build a subcommittee to say, look at the alternative structure and see if we can find a way to do this without merging. Present another alternative, present another possibility. You didn't hire a consultant, you didn't survey towns, you didn't ask for public input in the beginning. You went dead long into this. Vermont Superintendents Association said, we will cheerlead consolidation if you don't consolidate superintendent's positions. And we know that's where big money could be saved. So I'm really, and Frank up in Leland and Gray, he presented a agency fund or administered it anyway, maybe help develop it, to spread costs over a wider number of students. You didn't look at that, you didn't talk about that, and it's an opportunity to go about this in another way besides merging. And I think there are a lot of people in the state, not just in our area, who are not happy about merging. And they want to keep their schools local. They want to have a voice. The leadership councils don't provide for that. And I'm sorry to be shaky, but I'm emotional about this because I feel strongly about keeping our local schools local. And so I hope, maybe it's too late for that, but I just felt the need to say how I'm feeling about this. And I don't think I'm alone. And I would urge you to take some time, perhaps, if possible. Dummerston has set up a subcommittee for alternative structures and urges other school districts, other school board members to get together with us and talk about it. Have a discussion. If it doesn't work out, it can't be done, fine, but there are a lot of people in the state who think it can be. And it doesn't have to involve merging to save money, present opportunities for kids, and afford taxpayer relief. So, sorry to go on so long.
That's good. Yeah, Mike?
A couple of comments. I don't know, mentioned the Act 49 and the intent of the side-by-sides. It certainly was not targeted directly to Vernon, but when I introduced the language, I had Vernon in mind. But it was introduced to provide greater flexibility to districts to seek alternatives if they so desired. And it was to provide maximum flexibility to the bill itself. That was the intent of the side-by-side language. That's why the changes are there. The targeted language, again, was the section specifically to Vernon. And the other thing, Inez raised the question about could the legislature change things. The legislature has the authority to change whatever it desires to change. The safeguard is that you have to convince the legislature to do that. My bill, 49, passed unanimously in the House, but that took a year's worth of work, and you had to prove to several committees, the Ed Committee, House and Senate, the Finance Committees, that it was something viable. The legislature just doesn't haphazardly change things, but it does have the power to change what it feels needs to be changed. So there's always that possibility of a change that's going to impact what we've done, but certainly none of those changes are taken lightly, and it's not an easy process to get those changes made. So I think the answer is yes, the legislature could, but you have to have a real solid and sound reason to do so.
Thank you. And I just want to say too that I think that Jill brought it up first, and then other people had echoed it. But I'm interested as well to hear what the new law says about some of the things that we looked at early on, because we did look at a lot of alternative structures in subcommittee formats, and a lot of those things tied our hands. And there's some folks that are sitting around this table right now that spent a lot of hours looking at things and looking at the law and looking at what we could and couldn't do. And if those things have changed, I would love to hear what those are. And I haven't read however many pages Act 49 is, but I would love to, if there's a way to look at that differently, then that's great. But hopefully in a couple weeks when the folks come down from up north, we can ask that question and they can answer that question for us succinctly.
That's exactly what I was going to point out. A lot of those alternate structures we dismissed, not because of the merit of the structure as it applies to us, but simply because of specific legal requirements. And if those are changed, then the whole thing could be different.
Very much so. Yeah.
Paul, I want to echo a little bit of what Dick said, but also on alternative governance structures, it's not a study committee purview. It's supposed to originate with local school boards, and that's why Dummerston had an article at town meeting to see if the voters would. It was a advisory article, obviously, but it was an article that would advise the school board to enter into an alternative structure, governance structure, but Dummerston can't do it alone. It needs to work with Brattleboro, it needs to work with Putney, it needs to work with Guilford, it needs to work with Vernon. And so the various school boards need to be involved in this discussion. And this is one of the frustrating things that I think about a committee such as this, not that it hasn't done a yeoman's job in terms of pursuing what your charge was, but one of the frustrating things is it hasn't reached out and said, well, how can we do what we are doing and under our existing structure and meet the goals of the law and solve some of the problems that are paramount. Let's see if we can solve Guilford's problem. Let's see if we can solve some of the other problems. People talk about equity. Let's see if we can solve some of the equity problems in terms of using this alternative governance structure format, which would preserve our existing structure, but yet enhance it with the problem solved that need to be solved. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, Jeff.
Just like to respond to that from a Brattleboro perspective. Paul, that came up at Brattleboro's town meeting as well, and for us, we felt like we're already doing that when we're sitting here at the table.
Well, I know you said that at town meeting, Jill.
And that was the voters' decision as well.
Right, but my sense was that, it wasn't put forth, or maybe the town body didn't understand it. It's a purview of the school boards to talk to other school boards and work that way in terms of organizing an alternative governance structure. It doesn't work through the formality of the existing 706B committee.
The only thing I don't understand still, what I said at our town meeting, there's 3 of us from the Brattleboro Town School Board sitting right here, so there's a quorum of us. And I understand that's not exactly the same for the rest of us, but we're sitting right now with school board members from all the rest of the schools. So I don't know how else we would do that, but sit here at this type of a format and have these discussions.
And if I might add, I know that the subcommittee, well, I have not heard the Dummerston subcommittee for the alternative governance structure come to the Dummerston board and request that it meet with set up meetings with our town boards to talk about options. So that request has not come through from the governance structure yet.
Beth?
I just wanted to say that the suggested article that was proposed at town meeting, Guilford School Board took very seriously and actually put together a very lengthy presentation to our entire town at town meeting that went through all of the options that were available to us at that time and concluded pretty clearly at that point that any type of alternative wouldn't work in our scenario. So I think we came to that conclusion, we took that advice, we followed that suggested article, and I just don't see any other alternative that would work for us. But I think we're very confident in saying that we've done that already.
Christine? Hold on a second, please. Christine?
I would just like to address that the word alternative applies to alternatives and alternative governance structures, and so the Dummerston Committee is looking at all the alternatives, of which alternative governance structures are one of the alternatives. Are you following me? Yes. That includes MUD, which is about what that sentence felt like to me. So the committee has met 5 times, and we've eliminated some things, and then some things that looked great don't look so great since Act 49 came through, 122, 513, Act 49 now. So, and some partners that we were looking to see if they wanted to join us and partner with us in some other structure have been granted exit visas from real consolidation through Act 49. So we're down to like 4 or 5 things that we're pursuing and then are going to bring them to the board at that time.
We might just say too that remarkably, I hear from Christina about some of these ideas, and we think I'm completely open to hearing about them as a Brattleboro perspective. And Beth and I have spoken numerous times trying to go through the law and see if there's any other way out there that could address the constant concerns of the Dummerston folks in particular, and try to get to it. I know I've bugged Alice, I've bugged Amy, I've bugged Kim. It's just, I've even probably bugged Ian in the grocery store at one point. You know, just trying to think if there's anything else.
Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that, you know, if I'm sorry, Eric Findell from Guilford. You know, if you want to, if any alternative does not address the funding formula, I think really that's the crux of the issue. In that, you know, we have 100 students, and I know last year we had a level budget, and our tax rate still increased. So you can go through all the alternatives you want, but if you don't have the safety of 2,000 students, then we're at risk every year.
Yeah.
So I think if you don't address that first, then I think that's then you're missing the point. You know.
Just to follow up on what Beth was saying about their town meeting, you know, it struck me, and I saw your town meeting, Beth, at Guilford, and your article, the non-binding article to set up a committee was passed. It wasn't passed in Brattleboro, and I felt it wasn't passed in Putney either, but I felt it wasn't passed because people were confused. What we've just talked about here, and what the study committee has said they've done, is looked at alternatives to merger alternatives. That's where it gets confusing. All of those things you guys looked at, all those options that were what you surveyed, were merger alternatives. Alternatives to merger are the alternative governance structure that we now have as a governance structure entity. That's an alternative to merging. What you guys looked at were merger alternatives, whether you had a MUD, whether you had a conventional, whether you had an accelerated. What else did you look at?
No, we did discuss we called it, I think, self-study, but basically it's staying the same, and concluded overwhelmingly that we're in a very bad position right now as we are. And so, as Eric just said, unless you change the funding formula, it doesn't work for us. However you want to do it, it doesn't work. So we very quickly eliminated that as an option in our study because it doesn't work. We've proven that.
But I don't know if you're talking about the funding formula from the state, or are you talking about the funding formula for what unifying funding through merging would do for the district?
From the state, so per student spending, over 100 students doesn't work for us.
Yeah, but you could get around that by merging, you could unify funding.
Thank you, Dick. Maybe you guys can have a conversation afterwards.
And just to clarify a point, that vote failed in Putney because the vast majority of the voters expressed a trust in the school board in order to investigate things that, like Act 49 that came along, but they didn't think that there was a need for a separate group or a resolution to support that because they trusted the school board.
Just like to thank the chair's indulgence for having this conversation, but I also think it's an important conversation that we're having, that there's a constant feeling, especially from Dummerston, that somehow this study committee has an ulterior motive that I just personally have never been able to find us having. And so, and many of you will know that I've had private conversations for 3 hours with Richard and with Andy at town meeting, with Jody and with Vernon, and I keep trying to reach out and to talk about these things and try to figure out some other way, and I think all of us are doing that. So my biggest feeling through all of this is I keep hearing chastisements that you haven't done this, you haven't done that, you need to do this, where I feel like we're trying to do it. If you have specifics, which I love that Dummerston is doing, because Dummerston's been the most concerned, but a specific, this will work, and this is why it will work. That's what I think we really need to look at. To that end, moving from that topic, Frank, I feel like it keeps coming up, this whole idea of what you put together at the other central supervisory union. If you could address that, maybe you don't want to do it tonight, but maybe at our next meeting somehow, for people to understand why what you put together for them, you don't feel is a proper way for us or an advantageous way for our supervisory union? Is there a,
Yeah, I can summarize that very briefly, and then we can talk more about it if there's interest. But the idea of creating an agency fund at the supervisory union to centralize employment is exactly what Act 46 does try to accomplish, but it doesn't do it on the what is often referred to as the specials or the itinerant staff, which generally refers to maybe the art, music, phys ed. It's folks that oftentimes, because of the way in which a curriculum is designed and a schedule in a building is built for teaching, oftentimes they're not fully employed in small schools, these folks, in terms of those disciplines, those curricular disciplines. And so in a rural system like Wyndham Central, an agency fund allows these small schools to retain a full-time phys ed teacher who goes around to the various schools. The reality of that, though, is that it's cumbersome and inefficient from the point of view that you're losing a lot of productivity time when you're traveling 45 minutes between schools. So what it does not accomplish is get to the core of what Act 46 tries to address, which is the teaching staff, the direct instruction, the core of why we exist as public schools. No one that I know is that I'm aware of is employing the core staff at the supervisory union level and then still saying we will allocate those costs out to various districts, because why not just merge if you're going to do that? In that a school board is the governor of a entity, and why you exist as a public school obviously is to instruct children. You need a staff to do that. If the school board says, well, we're just going to hire out some other employment agent to employ our core resource, well, what's the school board left with? The school board's left with managing a building, basically a landlord. You know, what's the point of that? That's the direction that this goes when you try to expand it to a system-wide model. So it works for these special circumstances, particularly in very rural areas, but when you try to scale it up to a full operational system, there's so many compromises there that you want to be looking at a unified system.
So this doesn't speak to the agency fee, but it speaks to what we've done with special ed consolidation. The fact that we're able to consolidate special ed and those staff are part of the supervisory union or district allows us to distribute those staff as needed based on student needs, IEP needs, in a more cost-effective way, certainly to the smaller districts. So again, that's because of a consolidation that was forced on us, and I don't think at the time any of us felt like it was a really good thing, but it's turned out to be a really good thing. And it certainly has improved the services to students at a more affordable cost. Yes.
I'd just like to speak briefly to what a couple people pointed out about the study committee not looking at the self-study option to keep our structure as it is. We did discuss it, but it's been very clear throughout this process that that wasn't really our mission. The mission of the study committee was to put together a merger. So, we build the best merger that we can, and then we present that merger to the people. Your no vote is saying, no, we want to keep our structure. That's the question. Here's what merger looks like. It's the best merger we could put together. Here you go, people of our towns. Do you want to do this or not? No is your self-study, keep the structure we have, and then the school boards have to justify that under the law. But that's, I think that's really where that part of it comes in.
Christine, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, maybe it's because it's after 7, but it seems like if it's working so well to employ all the special education teachers at the top level and allocate them as needs arise. I'm flipping the question around. I don't understand why that couldn't in some fashion work, creating one entity for
So
hiring.
special ed is a coordinated system, and obviously it's not direct classroom instruction all the time, as your elementary first grade teacher is, second grade teacher, and so on. So they're very different kinds of assignments when you split employers. But when you want to share staff among several employers for folks that are certified in different, elementary ed, middle school, high school, and then at the high school levels, the various science and English and so on. You run into an awful lot of complexity around trying to coordinate the class schedules by building, the activities and so on, and you quickly have trouble if you are independent entities sharing staff. If you're separate employers, then you start running into the problems that we've talked about before, which is you need a minimum of 17.5 hours of employment at a employer to qualify for Blue Cross Blue Shield. So in a scenario where you're trying to deal with multiple employers, you're going to run into that problem with your core staff, because inevitably you're going to try to accommodate the 5th grade class that only has 6 students one year but has 14 or 20 in another year. So the inverse of that is you're asking, well, why not employ them all at the SU and then send costs back to the district? The key point there is, what is the school board left with? What is the school board doing back home at the local district? They have no employees. What are they going to do? Right? You no longer are governing an operational system, right?
So in effect, you've merged.
Well, yes and no. I think you're still determining policy for your school. You're still determining what programmatically is happening at your school, and you're still
But you have no employees.
So?
We don't have, we have
But
special
we
eds going
exist-
on, we don't have employees,
We
and it's working.
exist to instruct children, and that
I'm not
requires
saying that we
employees.
don't have teachers in the school, I just want that to be extremely clear, Frank. I'm not saying we don't
Well,
have teachers, but I think
It sounds like
a governing entity.
I don't see any of the benefits, and yet there's a great deal of complexity when you split governance from your workforce. When you chop up the entities. Again, you retain this vulnerability around separate grant lists, separate cost per student statistics, separate tax rates, all sorts of other complexity that I'm not sure what you gain when you look at the pros and the cons of that, but those are some of the implications.
Jody Armando, thanks, Ricky. I think this conversation that's just going on now could really be continued and could be solved, number one. Going back to the mission of the study committee, which was brought up, it's very clear that when the study committee accepts the $20,000, they are looking at the merger, the one merger they were going at. That's what they were looking at originally. What I would like to see everybody do is take a look at the goals that Act 46 has. They're admirable goals. And then look at how we can all work together to meet those goals. And I think we can. I think ignoring this, we're talking governance, we're talking finances, we're talking everything but kids. And the goals deal around, a lot of them deal around kids. And I think that's where we need to go. And Jill has talked about first of all, Jill started out with, she wanted the money, but then she went to the kids. And
I still want the money.
Yeah, you still want the money, I know, you probably do. But I think it's the goals that are important. And I think this conversation tonight is great. We haven't been able to have this conversation for 2 years. And I think thanks to Ricky, you've done a wonderful job. You're inclusive. And I think that's wonderful. And I thank you for that, because the conversation is important.
Sean, did I see your hand up before? Sure. Sean Murphy. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I'd like to bring it up anyway. I'm on the high school board, and I have been for many years. And I think that a lot of these discussions get stuck on elementary schools, which are obviously extremely important. I love Guilford School. Both my kids went there. But the high school is an amazing entity. And it is a unified entity, and it has been. So, you know, like in Guilford now, we will have pre-K next fall, and the kids will go through 6. So that's that block of a student's education. Then they'll come here from 7 to 12. That is almost an equal block of time that students are spending in school. So I don't think we should lose sight of the success of this campus. The Brattleboro Union High School, the Career Center, and BAMS for some towns, not Putney and Dummerston, is an extremely successful model. And saying that doesn't downgrade the importance of the elementary schools. But I would just like to put that out there and say how important the high school, the BUHS Career Center and the BAMS and the high school are to so many people, and definitely me as a member of that board.
I just needed to reply to Jody on that. Alice is not here, and to make a statement like that about inferring about how Alice has been chair of this board was not appropriate and not called for. And also earlier, your opening statement about how you were disappointed that board members were not. But you have no idea what our lives are like, what other obligations we have, and whether, we have other things that were already on our calendars before we found out about that meeting. So to assume that we didn't want to participate, it's uncalled for as well.
I've seen a lot of that same kind of thing happen here, downing somebody else. So I'm sorry if I downed you and felt that way, but that's the way I felt.
Well, and that's fine, but you don't make blanket statements like that without knowing what is going on in everybody else's lives.
I think we've had a pretty decent conversation tonight, and I'm gonna wrap things up for tonight. If anybody else, people are having conversations, but we have a bunch of questions to send up north, so they have a chance to respond to those questions over the next couple of weeks when they come down, so they have time to research whatever they need to research to answer those questions for us, which I think was one of our goals for tonight, was to come up with those questions so that we can get that stuff done.
I'd just like to respond briefly to what Sean said about the high school board.
Okay. Briefly, and then this will be it unless there's something else.
I just want to say, Sean, we do have a wonderfully functional high school board and a great entity there. You're assuming that if we radically change everything, it's going to look like that. I'm afraid if we radically change everything, we're going to lose that.
All right, is there a motion?
I have one more thing too. Sorry. But I too agree that the conversation's healthy and that the conversation needs to be happening. At the same time, I want to repeat what I said before. I feel a lot of times like I think my daughter would say I treat her, unfortunately. Where I say clean your room and then I'm mad that she didn't clean her room to the level that I wanted. I feel like that from you folks, where you say you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't look at this, and we feel like we did. Okay, so then if you have a specific thing that you really think has to be different, let's hear it. Not just a criticism of this is terrible, we don't like this. Then be very specific as to exactly what you want. I know Richard, you and I had like a 3 or 4 hour meeting in October of 2016, and I've been waiting since then for specifics. exactly what it is that you think can make this sort of a merger work in a different way. Christina and I have had many conversations, and I know she's come a lot closer. She's got a lot of ideas. They've played them out. Beth and I have done the same thing. What if we did this? What if we did this? We put it in this structure. Even Lyle and I did that 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Up there, it's not like it's not going through our heads. We did it with Donna Russo Savage, and I still need the color-coded charts. Got lost. But, and she was very clear, Jody, to your discussion to Amy earlier, that that didn't include the opposition. She has it very clear that Dummerston has opposition and that Vernon's had concerns. Good grief, we go into those school board meetings and people nearly attack us and they say, oh, Wyndham, yeah, we've heard. Snow. Anyway, I'm done talking. I'm going back to crocheting.
I would make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstentions? We're adjourned. See everybody on the 21st.